They thought our merchant vessels were unarmed. They were not. The outer hull plates of the massive lead cruiser did not crack, and there was no roar of fire across the vacuum. The 3 grand dreadnoughts of the blockade vanguard simply softened in the dark. Their thick bronze armor turned to gray dust, scattering like fine salt between the stars. Fleet Archon Malachor Vex watched the primary power grid on his command console dissolve into liquid lines. No alarms rang on his bridge because the wires inside the walls had already changed to powder. Through the wide viewing glass, he saw the human merchant vessels continuing their slow, steady march. They moved in a perfect line, their blunt noses cutting through the cloud of what used to be his fleet. The logs show 42 ships crossed that gate. Not one turned back to ask for peace. Stay close. Commodore Raymond Dane sat at his metal desk on Horizon Station Terminal 8, rolling an unlit briar pipe between his teeth. The small office smelled of stale chicory coffee and cold oil. Outside the plastic window, an automated cargo crane slammed a steel bin onto the deck, sending a rhythmic shudder through the floor. On the bulkhead behind him, a dented copper fuel cell coupling thrummed with a continuous, low 3 Hz vibration. Dane did not look up from his ledger when the door hissed open. He ran the stump of his left ring finger along the edge of the paper, tracing the shipping manifests for the Verge corridor. Logistical analyst Kyan Ward dropped a plastic slate onto the desk, his fingers smudged with dark conductive ink. The directorate just finished the vote, Ward said, his breath coming in short, uneven gasps. They passed the motion 300 to 12. The Zulkari Protectorate is moving 3 full strike groups to the Maugate choke point. Dane shifted the unlit pipe to the other side of his mouth and turned a page. They want the grain haulers, Dane muttered plainly. Ward nodded, tapping the screen. Vex signed the order himself under the Administrative Requisition Clause. They are calling it a routine legal collection of resources. Dane stood up, smoothing down the front of his faded blue uniform coat. He picked up a small mechanical key from the desk and slid it into his pocket. Tell the convoy captains to maintain their baseline speed, Dane said, his voice level and flat. Do not cut the engines. Do not broadcast an appeal to the Central Council. Just let them get close. He walked out of the office, his boots clicking softly against the loose iron grates of the gantry floor. Behind him, the dented copper coupling on the wall continued its steady, trembling hum. In the High Council chamber on Capital Prime, Fleet Archon Malachor Vex adjusted the heavy ceremonial sash woven from liquid obsidian across his chest plates. The air in the white jade amphitheater was thick with the smell of old tallow candles and copper ink. Vex stretched his upper set of scaled arms, his 6 lateral eyes blinking in pairs as he looked down at the empty chairs of the human delegation. The Terran Logistics Registry is a matter of clear mathematics, Vex announced to the assembly, his deep voice shaking the glass light fixtures. Their ships are built on standard freighter chassis frameworks. Our rules state that civilian logistics hulls cannot mount heavy military energy grids. Elder Valen, the senior diplomatic arbiter of the Sari Conclave, raised a thin, feathered hand from the high gallery. His voice was raspy and low. The human design logs have been open for 45 years, Archon, Valen said, his collar feathers stiffening as the main screen updated. Yet your data teams have never processed the internal structural variance fields. You are counting the boxes, but you are not weighing the iron. Vex gave a short, clicking laugh through his mandibles, dismissing the old avian with a sharp wave of his bronze claw. A worker's truck does not carry the teeth of a warship, Vex said flatly. We will collect the grain at the gate. At the edge of the Maugate corridor, 42 human cargo vessels drifted into the shadow of the Imperial blockade fleet. Each freighter spanned 2 kilometers of scarred, unpainted titanium, their blocky shapes looking like rough stone blocks next to the smooth, iridescent hulls of the Protectorate cruisers. On the bridge of the flagship, Vex watched the red tracking icons close the distance to 5,000 meters. The human ships had locked their directional stabilizers, keeping their broadsides exposed to the dreadnought Vanguard. They are matching our vectors exactly, the tactical officer reported from the lower pit. Their secondary shields are completely cold. They are preparing to open their cargo bays for the boarding pods. Vex leaned forward against the bronze rail of his bridge, his 6 eyes tracking the lead freighter, the worn boot. He touched the transmission switch on his console, sending his voice across the open channel to the human fleet. This is an official administrative collection under Directorate law, Vex barked into the microphone. You have 9 minutes to clear your cargo decks and isolate your reactor cores. Any ship that alters its course will have its registration rating dropped to 0. The screen remained gray and silent for 3 seconds before the face of Commodore Raymond Dane appeared. The human was sitting in a low pilot chair, slowly turning a briar pipe between his teeth. Your tables tell you what the ship was built to carry, Archon, Dane said, his voice coming through the speaker without a single hint of fear. They don't tell you what we decided to put inside it. Vex frowned, his chitinous brow ridge knitting together as he looked at the human's calm face. Your hulls are cheap steel, Vex stated coldly. They cannot hold military power lines. Dane took the pipe from his mouth and tapped it against the side of his chair. We don't use power lines, Dane said plainly. We use mass. Inside the tracking center of the worn boot, Tactical Officer Elena Rostova turned the mechanical safety key in the secondary console, activating Charter 44. The external hull sensors suddenly went white as the deceptive cargo shielding blocks dropped away from the freighter's sides. The massive, blocky cargo pods did not slide open on hinges. They dissolved from the inside out, revealing solid columns of black magnetic capacitors that filled the entire length of the vessels. On Vex's flagship, the automated sensor boards began to stutter, their green lights shifting to a violent, blinking purple. The density readings are climbing, the lower pit officer shouted, his arms shaking as he punched the manual override keys. It is not cargo. The entire internal volume of the fleet is registering as a single kinetic projector grid. Vex slammed his fist against the bronze rail, his 6 eyes widening as the human vessels began to generate a massive localized gravity spike. Fire the main batteries, Vex roared. Cycle the primary shields to maximum particle defense. But his systems could not adjust in time. The human freighters did not fire lasers, and they did not launch missiles. They simply discharged their integrated subatomic structural dampening fields at point-blank range, turning the space between the two fleets into a solid wall of inverted molecular weight. The physical transformation of the Imperial Vanguard was immediate and silent. The 3 Grand Dreadnoughts did not explode, and their fuel lines did not ignite. No flash, no fire, no scrap. The heavy bronze hulls simply lost their molecular bond where the fields touched them, crumbling into microscopic particles that floated away in long, gray ribbons. Vex watched his own hands begin to turn to gray ash as the bridge windows dissolved into fine sand. He looked down at his terminal one last time, seeing the human shipping manifests update themselves on a screen that was already melting into salt. The next morning, Elder Valen stood alone in the center of the high scriptorium on Capital Prime. The cavernous white jade room was entirely empty, the stillness broken only by the soft, wet stamp of the automated record keepers updating the daily transit sheets. On the central display board, the 45 red icons representing the Protectorate Strike Group had been wiped clean. In their place sat a single, white file entry containing the updated terms of the human trade routes. The human delegation had left a small copy of the new maritime charter on the table before leaving for the outer rim. Valen reached down with his thin hand and turned the cover page over, his feathers smoothing down as he read the single handwritten sentence at the bottom of the ledger. Outside the grand windows, the distant stars burned cold and sharp across the open lanes. The 42 human cargo ships were already passing through the maw gate, their blunt noses dark against the light of the inner rings. The 3 Hertz vibration stopped, meaning the mass wasn't moving anymore. The vacuum had swallowed the rest. He set the white folder back onto the stone table. The text faced up. We don't build shields to keep you out. We build them to keep the noise inside.